Hi everybody, I'm Susan Goethel Campbell and I'm from Detroit. So I'm really happy to be here, and I didn't bring work other than one print over there. But what I thought I would do in this presentation is talk about how print media has really informed 4 different bodies of work, and everything from traditional prints to multiples, prints as documentation, and public projects that I've done. So I've been making prints a long time, and when I think back to all the types of work I've done, it's the process that's informed all of my other work. So in terms of traditional prints, I've been working specifically with wood for the past probably 15 years, not much else. And I love wood for the nuance and the really unique organic qualities. This is a series that I started in Germany at a residency, and they had a really ginormous etching press, which was great. I worked on plywood, and I had really nowhere to lay the work out, so I wound up working outside a lot. And I did this series of prints called Heatscapes, where I printed the backgrounds and then I did hand stenciling. And these are based on the concept of urban heat islands, where weather patterns in a city are often different than surrounding areas. So the outline and the geometry in the prints really references different cityscapes, especially US cities that are laid out on the grid. Detroit is pretty much laid out on the grid. But I worked with very hot colors, and this came about mainly, I was going to be working in black and white ink, and it didn't have any ink. I had ordered some and it never came, and they had all this offset ink, these really hot colors. So I just went with it, and it started a whole new body of work for me that I'm still working with today, and especially the concept of heatscape and urban heat islands, especially with global warming. So often when I'm working, I pair my woodblock prints with other multiples that I create, and I'll talk about these in a minute. But so I really mix up the discipline. I consider myself more of an interdisciplinary artist that works with the process of print. Here's another piece, and this is a 2-layered print. The holes are laser cut in there, and the movement in here with the little holes is based on wind, speed, and direction of ozone. So I work with a lot of data on environment and air pollution, but I don't make it that obvious. So it fuels my work, and it is always an investigation that's ongoing, but I don't choose to make it like didactic. I rather just, the work is based on some of those graphs, charts, and this is another work called, I think this is called Heat. These are woodblock prints mounted on panels. I like to work with architectural space. I follow a lot of information on heat across the world, and on days where there's really bad ozone, there's usually a color chart, and when they're in the red, purples, these really warm colors, it means the air is quite unhealthy. So it keeps me looking, and it keeps me engaged with other air movements around the world. I will start to work with the block of wood itself. This is a recent piece, and it's called Always Red. So I've started to insert ephemeral materials into some of these constructions that I'm doing. So the grass will actually turn brown, but the red will retain a certain color. So here's some of the information and data that I work with. Upper air soundings, wind speed and direction, ozone, plume animation is based on like blowing smoke and dust. So I find the the graphics to be quite compelling, and what I've done in some of these prints is to extract a gesture of information. These are hand perforated woodblock prints called Winds Aloft. So actually those little sort of L shapes, they mean something. They all, if they have a little hook on it, it means the wind is like strong, like 40 or 50 knots in the direction. It has to do with their speed. So these are pretty early works. I started these maybe in 2009. But it started to get me to pair information and the organic material of the wood. So I then wanted to sort of contextualize the information on environmental hazard. So I started to work with the concept of landscape, and I would then insert these gestures of information, those are all perforated holes, into the skyline. So you didn't really know what you were looking at. It could be a crazy firefly, it could be, I don't know, meteor showers. But again, when viewed closely, there's this movement created by the grain of wood and then the gesture that I put in the sky. So these are pretty long prints that I've seamed in the middle, so it's making paper longer. I threw a couple of process photos in here. I worked at the Print Research Institute of North Texas, and I worked with graduate students on an edition of prints, and that was really fantastic. I had like 8 students like ready every day. We got a lot done, and so you can see how I build up the layers of the gradation of the black. It's not in one blended roll. It's usually like 3 drops, and then I print this background. I look at what's there. I don't pre-plan it, and I try to coax something out of the wood that feels like a landscape, and then I start to envision where there might be a horizon. But I do travel a bit, and I take some of the patterns from the earth seen from above at night, and I use those into my prints. These are, I did a project in Pittsburgh. This is the only one that's actually based on a real specific place, and that's in Pittsburgh. And all those, for those of you that are print makers, like those little cloud formations are all just from wood that's not flat, so it doesn't ink up fully. So I use those nuances to make these prints. I've been fortunate to work with Aspen Wall Editions, and Aspen Wall is here. She makes beautiful prints, and they invited me to do something kind of different and experimental, so we started to play around with colograph, and the print that's in the show is a colograph that I did with them. And these are the series called Pandora's Cluster, and it's more on space and the universe. And there's actually a constellation called Pandora's Cluster, where it's a mashup of all these other solar systems. So I've used that with the geometry of urban environments. So the next body of print work that I want to show you is, these are multiples that I do. And I started about 5 years ago to think about plastics. I've been pretty active in environmental groups, and I have this distaste, like a lot of everybody does, about these molded plastics that everything is packaged in. So I wanted to do something around this concept of consumerism, and I realized that you could use the roots of grass very much like a print. So I started to create these objects based on consumer goods. I grew grass in them, and the roots would conform to the package. So it's sort of like a 3-dimensional print. So light bulbs, USBs, iPad. So I had all of these plastic containers, and I really sort of admire manufacturing in a way. There's a stunning beauty of all these multiples. but then there's also this sort of horror at how many goods we're creating. So I started to work with installation based on a lot of the packagings of food. These units were grown in packages from the lettuce that you get in a plastic container or from farms. And so I started to make these carpets. I started to stack them, and this was an early piece. And I'm now stacking them and working more architecturally. This is from a show in Detroit that I had recently. So the column was original to the gallery, but I wanted to play with this sort of structure of power and architecture, and the fluting was created in this left-hand column with, these are all relief pieces that you're looking at the roots of the grass that were grown in water bottles. And I'm trying to work with something that's as ubiquitous as you can see. It's just this object that is everywhere. And so I figured the water bottle was one of those ubiquitous objects. And this is a piece that's currently up at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Detroit. It's called Refurbished Wall. It is, again, the same process of I'm using the roots of plants to record packaging. And this one documents 4 iterations of iPhone. So I collected iPhone trays of the 4, 5, and 6. So these little things that look like bricks or little drawers, those are actually different sizes of foam. So this is like a 6 plus, this is a 4. And again, it's this idea of cycles and obsolescence, how we're so conditioned to have this technology that it goes obsolete or it goes dormant. So I'm really messing around with this idea of cycles in nature, cycles in manufacturing. So these are old flip phones. So I wanted this sort of archaeology of phone technology. And I haven't even gone beyond iPhone 6, doesn't matter, but I mean, I could keep going with it. So these are, just so you know, these are dried, they're not living. And the grass is dried as well. So one thing that I do with some of these installation pieces, once I've shown it, I take it outside and compost it because the soil is really great. So I worked with some fiber students in Texas, and we created these garden beds. I had a show there with these rounds. Once the show is over, we make these circular garden beds so that they can break down and kind of remediate soil. And these are all gardens for natural dyes. The one on the upper left is indigo. So it was a great project, I loved it. Here you can see they're eroding. And next, I want to talk a little bit about documentation. So I do a lot of play. Whenever I'm investigating a new material, I just have to play with it. And one thing I've done is document seasonal debris. Christmas trees are everywhere. And I started collecting all these trees and making these jumbo prints. But it was just a way to keep me involved with being outside in the winter and picking up things that were cultural and documenting. So these are really large prints from the trees. I don't think I ever showed them, but it's just, I do these investigations. This one turned into a bigger project. I wanted to record the weather over Detroit, and I purchased a webcam. I had a friend that had an office on the 22nd floor of a building in Detroit. Mainly I wanted to sort of spy on industry, to take a look at how much the stats were emitting. And the camera took a picture every minute, 24 hours a day for a year. So I compressed all of that into a video called Detroit Weather 365 Days. So there's 3 different parts of the city. All the data is running up here, the date and time. And it's split, when I show this, it's split on 2 screens, so it goes from the winter solstice to summer. So you see the weather in an hour and a half for 1 year. So that's one type of documentation I do using video. And then here's some stills from another view from that project. And I did the same sort of project in Banff in 2015. And then I'll also take some of the stills and make prints that these are digital, but then I hand stencil on the outside. And the last project I want to show you is how I use print more as a form of engaging with the public. So I think this was 2014, I was invited by Pittsburgh. They had this art festival to do a project called Portraits of Air. And I had been doing smaller versions of this project. It was a year-long project where they had me set up in a booth for during their arts festival. I handed out 8x10 air filters to people that are used in actually monitoring air pollution. It's really in the industry. And I framed them. I handed out 100 of them, and I gave them to people locally, and I said, just put this somewhere where you think the air is dirty. And then when you feel like it, mail it back to me. So it's kind of based on science, but it's not scientific. So it was more an awareness project. And people really engaged. I had a website. I had them send me photos of where they put the filters. That was the most interesting, fascinating spot. And this is the only one I'm going to show. This person actually put it on the hood of their car behind a bus. So the documentation for this project was a poem that was in the form of all the locations that people place their filter. Like it might be down the street behind the Coke plant, or on the hood of the car behind the bus, or across from the street from Burger King. And so these were places that I would never have dreamed of, but it became personal, became public, and then the documentation was, these are only a few of the filters here, so you just see just the different, this was at a barbecue where they smoke barbecue. One of these was from Detroit. This is a selection from different projects. And this really dark filter, because the paper's white, was in an actual air compressor that pulled particulate matter out of the air near the industrial section of Detroit for 24 hours. And that's how dirty the filter got. So, and then these are offset prints, and I document these projects in these posters. And there's a little bit of the poem. So those are the 4 bodies of work that are influenced with print. So thank you.
Does anyone have any questions?
No? All makes sense?
Okay. You talked about the body of work that we had in the show,
right?
Kind of using the imperfections of the wood. Did you
Yep.
proof each piece of wood ahead of time to
Yep.
tell where it was going to be, and then work? Did you plan around the imperfections?
Oh, always. Yeah. I will roll up a piece of wood and see what's there. I just let it kind of talk to me, and I go, this is too open, the grain's too open, or it's too close, or there's not enough interest, and maybe I'll print 2 black and white boxes. You know, it's blocks, not boxes. So yeah, definitely. I have a lot of wood that is not inspiring to me. You know, I just buy it and I don't know. And you can look at it and you think, oh wow, there's a lot of really cool stuff happening in the wood, but it doesn't always happen when you roll it up, like the little dips and sort of cloud-like formations that I can get out of there. I can't see them with the naked eye. They're just, and it's a really shallow relief. So.
That's funny, because for most printmakers, a piece of wood with a dip is garbage.
I know. Yeah, so and it's funny, I never carve wood. the material's so fantastic, I don't even want to carve it. So that's why I perforate the prints based on.
Why don't you talk?
Oh, over here, okay, so like this block of wood, there's can't, it's really hard to addition these. Like there was kind of a low spot here, but I like that. Every print is a little bit different. The holes are the same because I stack them when I punch them. But I use, for those of you that make books, I use that tool, Japanese screw punch, that you use to drill holes in paper for sewing. And I use that as a drawing tool. So that's how I work with these. I think of this as more of a drawing than anything else.
Do you trace a drawing, put it on top and then?
Great, that's a good question. So, yes, when I'm editioning, I actually will take a piece of mylar that I've printed out, a rough outline of the geometry of a city that I want to develop. And then I kind of build off of that. Like, some are based on European cities. This one I think is probably based on New York, flying out of New York. Sometimes I fuse images together, or I just create my own, Anybody else?
Any other questions?
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.